next we want to look at what are the methods for acquiring sovereignty. How does a state acquire sovereignty over a territory? And there have traditionally been 5 different methods for acquiring territory. The first of these is history, historical perspective, meaning if a state occupies land for an extended period of time, then that land is considered to be part of the sovereign territory of the state. And this is by far the most common means of acquiring territory, to acquire territory, to hold it for an extended period of time. So the historical perspective is the first means of acquiring territory, acquiring sovereign territory. Now the second means of acquiring sovereign territory is conquest. And conquest, again, historically meant that a state could take over another area, could conquer them, could defeat another state in war, and therefore obtain rights over that new state. And this is the way that many states grew, by engaging in wars and over time acquiring areas, acquiring regions by means of conquest. France at one time was actually smaller than the Duchy of Burgundy, which now Burgundy is a region within France. France and Burgundy fought over hundreds of years. Eventually France defeated the Dukes of Burgundy and took that land and obtained it by conquest. It became France, this part of this region that historically was an independent country. Now conquest, although we think of it in historical terms, is also very recent. Conquest is still used as a means of acquiring territory, even if only temporarily. Again, right here in the United States, in the last 10 years, the United States has invaded both Afghanistan and Iraq for an extended period of time, held those properties, held those regions, governed those regions, and they did so because they won them in battle. It was a series of conquests that allowed them to acquire that property and therefore acquire the ability to act as a sovereign. The third means of acquiring sovereignty over territory is what's called cession, in which an agreement is entered into, an international agreement that deeds territory from one state to another state. Now, cession, although it sounds peaceful, often comes as the result of military defeat. The most famous example of cession, probably after World War I, Germany was forced to cede large portions of the eastern part of the state, eastern part of Germany. They were forced to cede those properties to Poland. These region contained over 1 million ethnic Germans who suddenly were designated as Polish citizens. This obviously is something that bothered Germany to a great extent. They never formally acknowledged that this land was Polish, despite the fact that they had signed the Treaty of Versailles, in which the cession was made. And in fact, this former German land that the Germans had ceded to Poland was a sparking point for World War II, as Germany invaded Poland. But from a German perspective, the Germans were simply taking back the land that already belonged to Germany. So although we often think of it as a German invasion of Poland, from a German perspective, it was retrieving that land that was historically German, that historically was part of the sovereign territory of Germany. Another type of acquiring property, acquiring sovereignty over property is known as prescription. And prescription is a legal term. It means over a period of time that if a region is occupied by one state, and even though another state denies that region belongs to the first state, if enough time passes without any movement by the second state to reclaim that territory, then the law of prescription says that territory now belongs to the state that has claimed it over this time. A good example of this was a long-running dispute, decades long, 6 decades long dispute over a small region of land in between Thailand and Cambodia. These are two countries that are close together, share a border. And in this region, in this disputed region, there is an ancient temple. Thailand has always claimed that land to be part of Thailand. Cambodia has claimed it to be part of Cambodia. Cambodia and Thailand executed a treaty in 1904 which seemed to provide for sovereign control by Cambodia over that territory. Over the years, Thailand said, no, that treaty is not applicable. Decades later, Cambodia actually acquires World Heritage Site status for this ancient temple, and therefore, from a prescription perspective, the land, that disputed land, now belongs to Cambodia. Now, the fifth means of acquiring sovereignty over territory is new territory. This is called accretion. And accretion is what happens when there are new formations of land caused by river shifting, caused by silt and such growing in an area. So there can be new lands created, and a state can acquire title over these new lands through what's called accretion. There's new lands within the territorial boundaries, and therefore that new land becomes sovereign territory as well. There are other means of acquiring title over property, sovereignty over property. These are lesser means, not part of the traditional Big Five. For instance, renunciation. A state can renounce claims to territory. There is the process of joint decision coming after a war. Oftentimes the victors in the war can decide between themselves who the property belongs to, who owns title to this land, who has sovereignty over this land. Adjudication, meaning judges or arbitrators can award claims of sovereignty, can award title to one state or another. So those are the means of acquiring sovereignty over territory. So in this lecture, what we've looked at, what I want you to take out of it is, first of all, what are the 4 elements to statehood? What are the 4 elements to acquiring state status? Know something about self-determination, that concept of self-determination. And finally, understand the principles of sovereignty and how a state acquires sovereignty over a territory. That's it. Thanks, and we'll be back soon.